doing DeFi, greatest in the world, and they finally about to see why. What you know about XRD? I'm smart money, I ain't never on a decline. What you know about NFTs? It's not just Ace, when you finally gonna realize you need scalability, need more utility, then you better call on these guys. I'm going radical, I'm going Radix, I'm going radical, I'm going Radix. Hyperspeed DeFi, never on a decline, building the future, I feel like a savage.
Hello and welcome. I am Piers Ridyard, CEO of RDX Works, a core developer of the decentralized finance protocol Radix, a public ledger entirely focused on bringing DeFi into the mainstream. This is our podcast, The DeFi Download, a show about decentralized finance and all things crypto, where we dive into the details of the projects, assets, and services that are powering the DeFi revolution. Today, I have Robert Lelko, founder and head of research at Liquity. Liquity is a borrowing protocol on Ethereum that lets you borrow interest-free against your ETH. It currently has over $740 million of total value locked in the application and has done over $4.5 billion of interest-free loans to date. Robert, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks a lot for having me, Piers.
So Liquity is a later arrival to the space that MakerDAO kind of established, this concept of the CDP where you could print stable coins. And I think a lot of people have tried to come into the space and create something that is competitive to MakerDAO. It would be great to understand so that people who are familiar with MakerDAO from a few years ago can understand Liquity better. Like, talk us through what Liquity is and how what's similar, what's different, and why you felt that there was space in the market for another type of protocol of this nature.
Yeah, maybe let me start with some historic background. So it was in 2019 when I was looking into the DeFi space, which was very young and fledgling at the time. And that's how I came into touch with all those systems, like mainly Maker and Eastland and some others. And I just had the feeling that they were kind of pioneering new concepts, but they weren't as efficient as they could be. So for example, by efficiency, I mean how fast you can liquidate loans when they become under-collateralized, because by improving that, you can kind of also improve the loan-to-value ratio. That was the first insight I had, how to make more efficient liquidations and increase the loan-to-value ratio, which then became one of our core features or core benefits over Maker's CDP system.
Let's break that down just a little bit so that people understand. So when you say loan to value ratio, you basically mean how much collateral do I have to post versus what size of loan I can take out. And so if I wanted to do that on MakerDAO, I've got, $100 worth of ETH. What's my minimum loan to value ratio that I have to do on MakerDAO?
So MakerDAO, it depends a little bit on the collateral asset. But for Ether, on ETH, even on ETH, it depends. I think it's something like between 70 or even 66 and I think 80%, because you have like three types of even ETH assets, which have different loan to value ratios. On Liquity, it's a bit over 90%. And I can maybe explain why it's possible in a nutshell. It is really all about the speed of liquidation. So we kind of introduced a novel way of liquidating positions that kind of drop below the minimum collateralization ratio by creating a fund. We call it a stability pool, where people can deposit their LUSD in the first place, so that when you need to liquidate somebody's position, the system can just take it from the pool and basically just burn the tokens. So it can instantaneously liquidate. And as many people may know, I mean, liquidations shouldn't take too long, because during the time a liquidation is processed, the Ether price or whatever your collateral asset is may drop further. So by kind of making it instantaneous, we could improve upon the loan-to-value ratio and still being secure. But that's just like one of the benefits. There are others as well, like with Liquity.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really cool. I'd love to sort of spend a little bit of time on this here, because I think this is such an interesting area of DeFi and stablecoin design. So when I come to Liquity with ETH, I put my ETH into the protocol, and the protocol will then mint a stablecoin right against that. So LUSD. Now that LUSD we want, if the market's going to look at LUSD and go, yeah, that LUSD, that is worth $1, they have to believe that that LUSD is always backed by at least $1 worth of value somewhere, right? And so you need some way in which if the collateral underpinning it, in this case Ethereum, drops in value, you need some way in which the protocol can respond. And if a loan, an outstanding loan, if I borrowed $90 worth of LUSD, but my ETH dropped in value, I'd need some way in which that protocol could respond and make sure that my ETH didn't drop below $90 in value, because if it did, now there's an imbalance in the system. The liabilities of the system are greater than the circulating assets, the LUSD, right? Now, the thing that you guys did that I think is brilliant is make it so that the system can react far quicker than things that came before. So you have this pool, as you say, you have this pool that people can deposit LUSD into, so that they can do those. So the liquidations aren't waiting for people to come and bid on positions that need to be liquidated. And unlike MakerDAO, where you actually have to wait several blocks and you have this auction process that occurs, essentially your position is zeroed out very quickly if you fall below that collateralization ratio, right? So what's in it? Why would people put their LUSD into a pool to liquidate positions in the first place?
Yeah, so the fact is that liquidations still happen above a collateral ratio of 100%. They happen just below 110%, which means, let's say your position now dropped a bit below the 110%, but it still has something, let's say around 9% value difference between the value of your collateral, the ETH, and the value of your debt. And this kind of difference becomes a liquidation gain for whoever deposited LUSD in the pool, because those who deposited LUSD, they would lose some LUSD pro rata, but they would also gain a pro rata share of the Ether from the liquidated borrower. And normally, and we haven't seen any counterexample yet, even though the markets has, behaved quite widely in the last 2 years. But in any case, there was a liquidation gain at least of 5%, but most of the time it's around 9%, which you would get in net value from a liquidation. That's
very good. And if and the more liquidations that happen, the higher your return is gonna be on the LUSD that you're depositing in that pool. And as the liquidations get higher, and the returns get higher, then more people are incentivized to put more LUSD in because they're making money from doing so.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, there is this kind of nice feedback loop, but there is also another incentive mechanism, which is kind of our secondary token, the LQTY, which is also paid out according to a certain schedule to the stability depositors. So we have this double incentive, the liquidation gains and some LQTY rewards that you receive continuously over time.
Got it. And so you've had quite an interesting journey to sort of the launch of Liquity and the first sort of period of Liquity. I'd love to, because you guys jumped very quickly in the amount of TVL that you had, the amount of loans that you were doing. I'd love you to talk a little bit through sort of those crazy first few days, first few weeks of Liquity and what happened.
Yeah, so it was a wild ride, to say the least. I mean, we launched on April 5th, 2021, and within 10 days, we already kind of reached 1 billion in TVL. And I think it was the second week of our existence when I was kind of sitting at home and showing off, just wanted to show the charts. It was to my parents. The first time I wanted to show them all the Dune analytics. Kind of our system just reached 1 billion in size. And what I saw was a vertical line going up from 1 billion to 2.5 billions. And I thought this must be a bug. This is not possible. What happened here? And it was all in hindsight that it turned out that it was one big position by Justin Sun, who opened it after 2 weeks, a very young protocol, very degen move. But it was a crazy moment because, initially it was a shock, but then it turned out that people were already speculating on Twitter, like who opened this like huge position. So it was really like a nice surprise rather than a bad surprise.
Amazing. I mean, like the risk tolerance of someone putting over $1 billion worth of collateral into a project that's 2 weeks old, like that does boggle my mind. Like Justin Sun is just playing a completely different game to everyone else. So could you talk, like, if you were gonna do a retrospective on this, if you were gonna give advice to anyone who's out there thinking about launching a DeFi project, a DeFi application, what would you say that you guys did right in the preparation to your launch and post your launch that you think had such a big impact in creating that sort of huge initial spike of use?
Well, I'm not sure if it's directly related to this initial spike, but what we did very differently from most other projects is our kind of extreme or radical focus on decentralization. So we built our system in a fully immutable way, so nothing can be upgraded. There is no governance at all. So there is no voting and no changes. And maybe that was also part of the reason why we had so many whales and so many big players jumping in so quickly, because they knew, we put out all the audit reports and everything like well ahead of time. And we were quite open with our like development process, even though we didn't have like a community in the sense that we didn't need, a community of voters, but we just wanted to make sure that we are as transparent as possible. And then we put out a system which is complete, which is autonomous. And maybe that was part of the reason, I don't know. Most people like it. Some people would prefer governance. So it's a bit like a contentious topic, but I think it worked out quite well for us.
And with V1, it's just ETH, right? Just to focus on
it's ETH. Just ETH, which is now also something which can become a little bit, throttling or like a bit of a bottleneck. I can maybe tell a bit more later. Yeah. Also like related to a new version that we are building. But yeah, of course, we had to settle on ETH. Back then, there were no liquid staked tokens out there. We knew that eventually Ether would become, or like Ethereum would switch to proof of stake, but it was well before this happened. So we wanted to stick with ETH as the purest kind of collateral.
Yeah. And I think that the ability to substantially increase the reduce the collateralization ratio, like one of the biggest driving forces for MakerDAO has always been people who have a large amount of Ethereum but want to stay long on Ethereum. And so for Liquity, as soon as you guys are able to make it more capital efficient to be able to create a stable coin, I think there's a lot of sort of pent up demand for being, well, I don't want to have to put in 150% to 180%, but if I only have to put in 110% or 120% to be able to create a stable coin, and I can still go and use that in DeFi, that's great. But obviously just launching a stable coin isn't the full picture. The stable coin then has to be useful, and it has to be liquid in other places. It has to be useful within other applications on top of the Ethereum network. And it also has to be liquid. So how did you guys do that second bit? What was the process there?
Well, that's a challenging process. Just putting out a stablecoin is not enough, as we have also experienced. Initially we had some built-in liquidity incentive program. Back then it was all on Uniswap V2 even. Mm-hmm. And then we had some Curve, like when Curve came out, or when they, like it was kind of the first version where they had like an incentive mechanisms for the pool. Then we switched to Curve. But of course, you cannot just sustain it. Like you cannot, rent liquidity forever, because that's at least not a protocol that like ours, because we are not able to kind of inflate anything. It's not an inflationary system. So yeah, it's like with partnerships with other projects, mainly where we want to increase the use cases for LUSD. Also now what has become quite popular in the last few months is that more and more DAOs and project treasuries, they are discovering LUSD as a good alternative to USDC or even DAI, because they are afraid of the centralization risk. So they like our LUSD, as a very stable and safe form of store of value. So yeah, I think that's something where we are now focusing on. I mean, the borrowing part speaks for itself. It's interest-free, so it wasn't hard to convince people to borrow. It's maybe sometimes harder to convince them to buy the stable coin, as long as you're not incentivized by like a crazy APR. I mean, there needs to be some organic reason to hold it.
Right. And the organic reasons are so nebulous. Like the in many ways, the hardest thing is to actually establish the Lindy effects of if you have a good mechanism, it doesn't matter if the market doesn't care about it. So like whatever your combination of narrative, decentralization, capital efficiency, and the way that you've operated in the market meant that people have picked it up. Now, obviously, when you were first getting started, you had that sort of like particularly heady few days, which is also going to have been massive for your credibility in the space. How have you found it? You talk about making partnerships with other DeFi protocols. What advice would you give again to startups who are thinking about establishing themselves, but they need to actually like work with other protocols? What advice would you give in terms of making those partnerships and being able to make what you're building integrated with other people?
Yeah, I think you should look for synergies and also sustainable partnerships rather than let's just pour in like a crazy amount of incentives and then that just creates like a one-off effect of a week. So you should rather try to build organic demand. And I think partnerships are a great way. Like, for example, I mean, we have different types of partnerships or different types of integrations. One of them is like how to make it easier to use our system. Like DeFi Saver, for example, makes it really easy and more user-friendly, because now you can automate basically everything and anything under the sun you want to do with Liquity. And you can sleep well during the night because you know you don't get liquidated because they would save you. So that's like, I think, a really useful type of integration. But then also just, I mean, we had partnerships with like kind of pioneers in the DEX space. Like we really like what Maverick, for example, did. I mean, I think I have a like kind of a tendency to favor innovation over just like reusing old concepts. And I think they really started with something unique. And so like it's hard to say there is no one advice, but watch out for innovation and make sure that you can sustain it for longer.
So talking about innovation, I think what would be good to do is just a brief interlude, because you alluded to the fact that just ETH the asset has some problems, but before we talk about that in terms of scaling, I'd love you to talk a little bit about the stablecoin trilemma. I think that not everyone's heard of the stablecoin trilemma. So could you talk a little bit about what the stablecoin trilemma is and how it applies?
Sure. Yeah. In my definition, there exists multiple versions, by the way, but in my definition, I would call three properties the main ones that your stablecoin should ideally kind of achieve. One of them is like resilience or robustness. Like you should make it so that it never collapses to zero, or that it remains kind of stable and credible, even if the markets are plummeting. That's one. Then the second one is, of course, scalability. So you want to make sure that when the market demands for a certain amount of stablecoins, the system can mint it, can kind of supply it. So that's number two. And then number three is decentralization, which kind of means that, we don't want to rely on any counterparty risks, no matter what. So, and then the trilemma basically says that it's impossible, or at least very hard, to achieve all three properties at the same time. I mean, many stablecoins have achieved two out of the three, or like some combination, but not really everything perfectly.
Right. Okay. So you could maybe point to something like USDC as being scalable and resilient, but not really decentralized.
Right. Yeah.
And then you could point to something like Liquity as being decentralized and resilient, but not so scalable, because for every dollar the market demands, you need at least $1.1 to $1.2, but really you don't want to be at the liquidation rate. You want to be higher than the liquidation. So you're actually going to be needing a bit more than that, right?
Yes, exactly. You cannot just like mint it, freely. You need to mint it through loans, which can become a bottleneck if there is not enough demand for taking out loans against ETH or whatever collateral asset.
Right. And so I'm sure some of this is where sort of Liquity V2 has come from, but you also talk about this idea of innovation driving forwards the space, and you need to continually innovate. So let's talk a little bit about the birth of Liquity V2 and where that's come from.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it has already been quite a while since we started like conceptually designing Liquity V2, and we iterated through many approaches, but the main, goal we set to ourselves was like how to overcome this trilemma, like how to build a system that can scale with user demand, which also implies basically a direct minting and redemption facility. Currently in V1, there is a redemption. So basically everybody can come with their LUSD and get the face value paid out in ETH. That's already possible, but the inverse is not. The system cannot just mint, when you bring, let's say, 1 Ether, the system wouldn't mint the current dollar value just as is. You can take out a loan, but then you need to over-collateralize it. So what we now want to achieve with V2 is kind of combine the current borrowing system, or at least a new version of a borrowing system, and with a decentralized reserve. And this decentralized reserve mechanism is now kind of a facility that would always allow people to mint and redeem the stablecoin at will, at any time, at least most of the time. And this kind of makes it so that, the stablecoin cannot really be above or below peg, because whenever that happens, there is an arbitrage opportunity to mint it or to redeem it. And by doing so, the reserve would grow or shrink. So you can also think of it as a decentralized version of Maker's PSM module, like peg stability module. It's there as well to kind of stabilize the peg, but it shouldn't be, filled with USDC or a centralized asset. It should be all based on Ether or some staked ETH, liquid staked ETH derivative, which makes the problem much harder. I can tell that. Like, that's really the key reason why it's a really ambitious project.
So let's talk about that a little bit more. Why would a stable coin move off peg? Why is a PSM necessary in the first place?
Yeah, it's really like the limitations that you have work from the fact that you need to match kind of the demand for holding, like buying and holding the stable coin, with a demand for taking out loans, because this demand for loans is what translates into more supply. Like, there is no, easy match between demand and supply, because you need this user group of the borrowers to print more money so that others can buy it. And there can be like a mismatch between the two sides of the market. And we have experienced that. Most of the time, there was a shortage of supply and like kind of an excess demand for LSD. Now, like, let's say a month ago, things started to change, which is also interesting, because due to the interest rate situation, mainly on Maker, now it's a bit less of an issue. Now we are kind of even hovering on the opposite end. But I think this will be temporary. Like in the long run, it's rather an issue that, borrowing, the demand for loans doesn't scale like limitlessly. You need more people want to hold stablecoins than people are willing to take out loans in stablecoins.
Right. Because essentially those people are taking risks on their assets.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I've got Ethereum. What's in it for me to take out a loan in LUSD when the market, when there isn't opportunities out there for me to be able to earn return on my LUSD, or that I have a particular desire to liquidate some of my position, given the fact that the market at the moment's looking a bit wobbly, and while it might break out upwards, it may always break downwards. And if I'm a long-term Ether bull and I want to hold my ETH, I'm not. Why would I put it at risk in this sort of like choppy market? So I can see if lots of people, so let's say that lots of people take out loans and mint LUSD, right? And then we have a bunch of people who decide that they're exiting crypto, so they're just selling LUSD on the market. Now LUSD is falling below the dollar peg. It's now at like 95 cents. I can see a big incentive for me as a lender to go out into the market and buy LUSD and pay down some of my position, because essentially I can mint LUSD at $1 from the system, but then I can go and buy it on the market for 95 cents. So I'm getting essentially a 5%. I'm making 5% on every single time I buy it. So that obviously, enough borrowers who have open positions are going to balance out any sell pressure on the LUSD to some extent.
Yeah, this is what I used to call a soft peg mechanism, because in theory they should, but they oftentimes don't do it, or at least not to the level or extent necessary to kind of push the peg back to 1. Right. Yeah, of course you should. It's a good time to close your loan when the stablecoin is below peg. It's also a very good time to open a loan when the stablecoin is above peg. But still, this is not like, a clear arbitrage opportunity. It's just arbitrage over time, which is a bit different. So that's why we thought we need something which is stronger than that.
Well, the thing I was going to say is that sounds simple and obvious when I say it, but then if you look at the opposite side of it and you go, well, if the stable coin is at 95 cents on the dollar on the market, most people are going to go, that stable coin is failing.
Yeah, that's another good insight, because eventually you would lose confidence, or the market
you'd lose confidence. So it doesn't. So what you guys actually want is you want a much tighter band than the market actually cares about operating in. Because what the users of LUSD are going to want, they're going to want to see that operating between a band of maybe like plus a cent and minus a cent. And for plus a cent, minus a cent, as a lender, as a borrower, I'm not really that incentivized to go and operate in the market. So you need something more powerful to be able to operate, to be able to keep that band nice and tight, so that the market views the LUSD as stable, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's why we want to introduce like a strong arbitrage mechanism where you can mint or redeem whenever it's like just slightly above or below the peg. There will be some fees though, so it won't be perfectly, the band won't be like infinitely thin, but it will be a few basis points or something. I mean, we haven't finalized the fee structure yet, but again, you want to have a very strong force from above and below.
So how's that work in Liquity V2?
Well, I mean, that part is relatively simple. I mean, when you mint a stable coin, you would come with some staked ETH. We haven't decided which one. Like, you put in your staked ETH and you basically get the current dollar value. Like, the Oracle price is then used by the system to determine like what's the current dollar value of the staked ETH that you bring to the system. Yeah, and the protocol then mints the amount in its own like stablecoin, which will be a new one, like a distinct stablecoin. LUSD is immutable, but the two systems they should coexist. So it will be a new type of stablecoin that you would get in return, and vice versa. When let's say the stablecoin is a bit trading below peg, then you would immediately want to redeem it, because then you would get the dollar value of it paid out in staked ETH. So But
so in this system, what you're saying is that if the systems sees that the LUSD, not LUSD, the new stablecoin. What's the new stablecoin called?
Well, it's the working name is like VUSD, but
VUSD.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it's like not the final one, I guess.
Cool. Yeah. All right. So placeholder VUSD. Is if the system sees that the token price, the Oracle is saying, oh, VUSD is trading slightly above, then someone can come and print 1-to-1, can take Ethereum or staked Ethereum collateral and print 1-to-1 VUSD, and then the other way, if it's slightly below, can withdraw 1-to-1 staked ETH.
Right.
Okay. So how do you make sure that all stays in balance? Because now the system is taking some volatility risk, right?
Yeah, that's a very good perspective. Like now we have taken away the volatility risk from our borrowers and transferred it to the protocol. Now the protocol has all the liability to keep it in check, like with the stablecoin amount, because you can only guarantee this redeemability if you can make sure that the dollar value of your reserve, which is now consisting of some Ether derivative, that this dollar value stays always in check with the outstanding stablecoin supply. So it's a bit technical, but I can maybe just highlight a few key principles how we want to achieve that. So first of all, we build our own hedging product. We are not going to, a centralized or a decentralized perpetual exchange as other protocols have already tried. We build our own native, let's call it hedging product, where a user can come, like this is a kind of a new type of user, can come and invest or like deposit some additional stake to the system. So the reserve would then grow. The reserve would then kind of have its own surplus, like it becomes over collateralized. And now those hedging agents, what they basically get in return is they get a pro rata share of the surplus. So whatever is above 100% collateralization kind of economically will belong to the hedging agents. Now, if you kind of think it through, it turns out that now you are kind of getting additional exposure from the stake that was kind of collected from the minters of the stablecoin, which means that there will be like an implicit leverage effect. Like the hedging agents, they are not just, betting or like using their own money, but they are kind of getting an additional leverage on the top of it. That kind of all sounds nice, but the problem is that by just doing this, we wouldn't succeed, I'm pretty sure. Because leverage is maybe in high demand during during bull markets, but in a bear market, we have seen that leverage is not really sought after and the system cannot attract enough people and it may become under collateralized. So that's where our second innovation kind of comes into play, which is we add principal protection to the mix. We make this hedging product so that you have some portion of the invested capital, which we call the principal, and you know that the system would always guarantee that you would get back at least this principal value. So to make an example, let's say you invest 12 stake ETH, your principal is 10, so you have this premium of 2, which is on top, but you know that all you can lose now in terms, like in Ether terms, is basically this 2 extra ETH, but you know that you can basically claim 10 ETH from the system. The way how this claiming works is also a bit technical. I can also deep dive, but maybe let's stop here and see, what you think.
So let's break this down a little bit more. So, from the point of view of creating a hedging market, you're taking the view that your underlying. I'm going to read this back from a slightly different perspective and see if this makes sense. The underlying collateral asset that underpins Liquity is volatile. It's ETH. Now, in options markets, you can essentially sell the volatility of an asset, and that's kind of what you're doing here. You're saying what Liquity cares about is it cares about the result of the derivative position to be as stable as possible. Now, the rest of the market can choose to take a position on that volatility, but because you're just buying the volatility, not the entire asset, that's where the leverage emerges. Because I can take multiples of exposure on just the volatility rather than buying the entire asset. I've split out essentially the volatile part of the asset and the stable part of the asset. Now, is that more or less correct?
Yeah, that's the first part. Without the principal protection, that's exactly the situation we are in. The system would try to sell its volatility to people who are willing to take it. And so the system becomes also what we call delta neutral, which means that no matter what the ETH price does, the system always kind of keeps the dollar value for its reserve.
So the principal protection bit was the bit I didn't understand so much in terms of how you actually achieve that. How do you guarantee, how does the system guarantee that it'll always be able to return 10 of 12 deposited? And as an addition to that, why would that be something that someone would desire? What's in it? Why is someone going into a principal why is someone putting 2 ETH at risk in the first place in their principal protected position? What's their upside?
Yeah, that's a great question. Let me start with the second part. So why would people do that? So first of all, we think that leverage in a bear market is just a difficult sell, while something which is protected is more suitable to like a larger or broader user group, because it's not just there for the most degen user, but also for somebody who is just an ETH believer and who wants to kind of increase the upside without risking too much. So there is a downside. You would risk this 2 extra Ether, and of course you're still subject to the Ether volatility, but assuming that there are enough people who are ETH believers who have their ETH holdings they don't want to sell, so they can now get an upside without like kind of an equivalent downside. So that's like for why would people want to use this? And then also like, and maybe the more interesting part, or like how would the system achieve this? Like, we cannot do it, in a very direct way. So the system cannot just, hey, give you, whenever you claim your principal, hey, you get the full 10 staked ETH. That may not, like that would not work. But what we kind of came up with is a very neat way of integrating the secondary market of those hedging positions into our system. Because we think that, first of all, those positions, they will be NFTs, so you could sell them to other people, and you could also sell them at a premium normally, because normally you have to kind of factor in the fact that you have a protected principal and an upside which is greater than the downside, and this should reflect in some time value or premium on the market. So, which is kind of similar to like an option, but this is a bit more complex because it's, has this principal part. But anyway, but what if somebody just wants the principal back? Like you put in 12, but you are happy to just get out 10. Now what the system does, it would just list your position for sale on the built-in secondary market. And then it would just first try to sell it for the principal amount as is. Now, in the happy path, somebody just takes it. But there may be situations where this doesn't happen. And then there is a timeout which the system can detect. Let's say 2 days, we haven't decided yet. But then after this timeout, the system would gradually start to increase your balance. Like your position kind of has this kind of variable balance, which is leveraged, but it also has the principal, which is stable. But now this variable balance would grow, like kind of increase over time. So the system kind of pours money or capital into the balance of your position to make it kind of more valuable. And at some point, some user should come or some buyer should be willing to buy it, because eventually there should be like this time value which becomes positive, and that's when somebody would buy it for the principal.
Got it. So essentially it gets advertised for 10, but then after some time it gets advertised for 9, but the protocol's providing 1, and then it gets advertised for 8 and the protocol's providing 2. Is that right or not?
It's a bit like the opposite. It's always advertised for 10, but the core of it, like this balance starts, let's say at 3, but then it goes up to 4, to 5, and eventually it becomes like significant enough to warrant a premium, or to at least make it so that this position, like the principal of 10, and let's say this balance of now 5, that those two components together are worth more than 10. Because you always get more than the principal. You can also think of it as a bond and a bet. You have a bond which is worth, or which has this nominal value of 10, but you also have a bet on the upside. And by pricing in this extra value add from the bet, eventually the bet should become significant enough so that people would pay more than 10, because they're not just pricing the bond, they're also pricing the bet.
Okay, and the bet here is on the upside of Ether, the asset.
Yes. So you can also just make the calculation. You put in 10, or when you buy such a position also on the secondary market, you know that you have this guaranteed principal, but if the markets go up, maybe you get like twice of it back or 3 times of it because it's leveraged.
Right, because it's leveraged, right.
So you have like an asymmetric upside compared to your downside.
It's going to be a complex market to price.
That's true. Like we are working on it. Like we are even collaborating with an external like research agency and a university. Yeah.
And so
prices.
Going back up a level, like what does this get for the end user that V1 didn't achieve? Like what, as a result of all of this sort of super interesting complexity and clever market mechanisms, what is now true about VUSD placeholder that is not true about LUSD?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the stablecoin itself, then obviously it should have a tighter peg. Unlike LUSD, which has deviated like multiple percentage points, this shouldn't deviate, maybe not even 1%. And then another advantage is that we can also make borrowing a bit more attractive, because borrowing, I haven't really talked too much about it, but the system would also offer loans. And just the fact that the loans are against staked ETH rather than just pure ETH, and also the fact that, you have a more stable debt, you have you have less risks when you repay, which makes it also a bit more like attractive. And then probably we can also improve upon like some other like loan to value ratio and some other aspects, but that's still like an ongoing work. But anyway, I mean, the loans become more attractive, I would say, in a number of ways, and the stablecoin obviously becomes more like stable. And then we've created this hedging product as a completely new product.
When you say more attractive, you mean that I need a lower collateralization ratio before I'm liquidated?
Yes. So yeah, it seems that even the 110% or 90%, if you just do the like opposite LTV, is a bit too conservative. Like surprisingly, because if you look at the statistics of how our liquidations, how they performed, I mean, as I mentioned, like normally they would always give you like this 9% on average liquidation gain. So we don't need that much to make it attractive. We could probably lower it.
Got it. And because you have this, you're not actually going to change are you going to change the bidding mechanism? Sorry, not the bidding mechanism, the pool mechanism for liquidations, or is that staying the same?
We'll have a stability pool, which will kind of back both the loans, but also the reserve as a fallback. So we have now this hybrid stability pool. And this stability pool, and that's also like the cool part, which I should have mentioned already, is that due to the fact that we are using staked ETH rather than pure ETH, it seems that we can split off some of the staking yield and pay it out to the stability depositors, who are now kind of backing both the loans and the reserve. And if you just do the math, it turns out that probably we'll have a multiple, like an amplification factor there. And currently the yield is already like quite handsome, with like 4.5 to 5% on ETH. But now you can get an even higher yield on a stable coin, which makes it so much more attractive. So we can attract people to the stability pool. And it's also much more sustainable than like some, liquidity mining incentive, because at least I guess that like ETH staking will always remain attractive, at least to some extent.
Yeah, and like in the extreme case, you could actually pay people to borrow.
Pay people to borrow. I mean, that would cost the system, in a sense.
It would cost the system, but if you needed to expand the VUSD supply for whatever reason, then you could make it attractive to be a borrower, because now you have that extra yield component.
So maybe I should also clarify that the borrowers, they keep their own yield. So they are kind of isolated. So they just borrow against their yield-bearing Ether and keep their yield. But the hedging agents, they would only get the yield on the surplus, like kind of the capital that they bring. Got it. The other part of the reserve, which is kind of provided by the stablecoin minters, this yield would go to the stability depositor. So we have this kind of nice yield redistribution to optimize the incentives among the players.
Very cool. Very cool. So it's been a fascinating conversation. I could talk to you for hours about this because it's sort of one of my the whole topic of stablecoins is was actually one of my first loves in crypto. It's one of the things that got me into crypto in the first place. But if people want to come and check out Liquity, where should they go? And also one more question, which is that you've got V1 and you've got V2. Does V2 replace V1 or is V1 staying about? Like, how should I think about these two new protocols?
Yeah, so the two new protocols, they should work in tandem and peacefully because V1 has this kind of very strong focus on radical decentralization and immutability, even though V2 would also most likely 99% be immutable, but it due to the fact that it's taking staked ETH, it's less pure. So we think that there will be a use case for V1 and V2 because, the risk profiles of the users may be slightly different. So we want to treat both systems as relevant and viable going forward. Mm. And regarding the information, so, Liquity V1 has been up and running for almost 2.5 years. So you can find more information on liquity.org. For V2, there's not too much information available yet. There are some like blog posts and videos on YouTube, but we are working hard to put out more detailed information, eventually light paper, but probably before that we will kind of continue our article series, or we would kind of want to provide more insights on how this system was built and what it offers.
Robert, thank you so much for coming on the show. Such a pleasure. And looking forward to talking again when V2 comes out.
It was a pleasure for me as well. Thanks a lot. And let's keep in touch.
I'm going radical, I'm going Radix, I'm going radical, I'm going Radix. Hyperspeed DeFi, never on a decline. Building the future, I feel like a savage.